Well, welcome back. We finished chapter 9, and it was 9E. And I did tell you that we were going to go over supplemental information, and that's what we're going to do now. And I want to talk now about Fragile X. And hopefully you watched the video and it gave you some basic background information. It's a great video shared by a family who's been touched by Fragile X, and the information that I'm going to give you now, I hope will just make so much more sense to you. And it is the information that you have on Canvas. And I think as I go through this information, it's going to make sense as to why we're doing this, okay? Fragile X syndrome. It is the most common inherited form of mental impairment. Let me repeat that. Fragile X syndrome is the most common inherited form of mental impairment. And it results from a change or a mutation in a single gene, and it gets passed down from one generation to the next. It doesn't matter your ethnic group, doesn't matter your income, wealthy or poor. It touches all races and all socioeconomic groups. And I do believe in the video you got a little information about males who have XY chromosomes, females who have two X chromosomes, and it gives you a little information as to how that happens when those genes mutate. This is not a genetics class, and I don't intend it to be. It is a language development course, and you will figure out, excuse me, the difficulties that our kiddos who have a diagnosis of Fragile X deal with. More than 80% of males with Fragile X will have an IQ of 75 or less. Now that's below that bell curve that you've heard me talk about, that bell curve, with 100 being right in the middle. The upper range is 115, the lower end is 85, and that's considered normal intelligence, 85 to 115, okay? So 80% of our males with Fragile X will have an IQ of 75 or less, and it could be somewhere between 25 and 45, the IQ. There are different levels of severity, mild to severe, and so you're going to see a wide range. Now the females who have been tested as Fragile X, their symptoms are more mild because of that Y chromosome. Because of that other X chromosome. I'm sorry, females have two X chromosomes. So their condition is more mild because that second X chromosome can sort of pick up the slack a little bit. So their mental impairment may only result in a learning disability, and they may have, some of them may have a normal IQ, some, but that doesn't mean they're not going to have learning problems. There are other issues with facial features. They have long faces. You may see large ears. The forehead may be very high and broad. I'm going to show you a picture. Hope you can see this. See this little guy, isn't he a sweetie? But you can see the long face, the larger ears, and that real high forehead. Now, a lot of times in infants, we don't see, or younger children, we don't see those symptoms. You can't detect anything that's different until they reach puberty and their bodies begin to change. And then those symptoms become a little more prominent. But you also have to look at the parents. And are those parents maybe showing some of those family characteristics? Oh, everybody in our family has big ears. Or, yeah, everybody's got a high forehead. And so you can't just say, oh, long face, big ears, high forehead, it's Fragile X. No, you can't do that. It is detected or it is diagnosed by a blood test. Very simple, very easy in comparison to some of the other genetic workups that have to be done. But this one is pretty easy to determine. Now, we know that not everybody is going to show the same degree or the same symptoms, and it may not get diagnosed until they're older. In the video, if you remember, I think Harry, the little one who went to Kindy, there's some accent there, dialect, kindergarten, Kindy, he was diagnosed early. Some of the other children were not diagnosed until they were older. And it can go undetected, and it may not get diagnosed ever or for a long time. There are social and emotional problems, particularly with the boys. They deal with a lot of high anxiety. They don't like going to new places. They don't like meeting new people. They want things to stay the same. They like a lot of routine. And what else does that bring to your mind? What else do you think of when you think of, don't like to change my routine, don't like to be around a lot of people? Well, what comes to my mind immediately is kiddos on the spectrum, because those are very, very much the same symptoms that these kids, autistic diagnoses, will show up. These kids with Fragile X are very visual. They work well with pictures. So picture schedules will work fine for them. And you saw it in the picture or in the video with Harry, little Harry. Mom was showing him the pictures of what he's already done that morning and what he has to do. Mom went to the school and took pictures so that she could prepare him for going to school. And I think in one situation, she prepared either Harry or the other children for some other event that was coming up, and she prepared them for weeks. So we know that the characteristics are similar to autism. We may see some sensory issues. There could be definitely attention deficit, hyperactivity. They are impulsive. They do not attend well. And many times when we test these kids, the tests don't really reflect what they're capable of doing because they have such poor attention. Language processing problems. And this is how we're coming full circle. We have talked all semester about early development when mom's pregnant, the first year, and what happens in terms of milestones. When they go into preschool, elementary school, adolescence, and we've even talked about adults and language. And these children also have language processing problems. When we talk about working with these kids, we need to know their learning style, just like we do with any other child that is in our classroom or comes into our therapy session. What do they really need in order to perform well, to maximize the skills that they have? We prepare them for change. We want to mix functional goals with the academic goals. They do well with computers. So do our kids who are on the spectrum. If they become agitated, we may need to find a place where they can go and calm down. Remember with Harry, Mom said his right ear turns red when he's becoming frustrated. And the teacher was stroking the palm of his hand because that's calming and soothing. So what she was trying to do is she was trying to catch him. She saw some agitation growing. She was trying to catch him before it got full blown. You can't learn if you're agitated, if you're tantruming, if your behavior is out of control. It doesn't matter what you do. And language takes attention. Everything we do and everything we learn, we have to attend. They don't do well with abstract ideas and organizing information and solving problems. They are capable of learning, no doubt, but it's challenging, that's for sure. Sometimes the boys will even pick up some stuttering and some pretty significant deficits in basic language skills. They may have difficulty pronouncing certain words. The grammar is poor, articulation errors. We don't see that as often in the girls. These kids can be late talkers, may not begin using words until around the age of 4, may not talk until they're 8. And so that means the sentence structure, the syntax comes late as well. Most males and about 1/3 of females with Fragile X will show autism-like behaviors. Biting, I think in one situation, the mother talked about Harry and that if he becomes highly agitated, he will bite. And I think Finn was also in that category. They are toe walkers. Now, I don't know if you know what I mean by that. If you're sitting, let's say you're just sitting at the mall and, you're just taking a break and people are walking by and you see a child go by and they're not doing ballet, it's toe walking. They're toe walkers. Well, that isn't a normal gait because at some point that heel comes down. Early when they're learning to walk, sure, but not when they're 5. You shouldn't see toe walkers. People diagnosed with autism first will have about a 4% chance of having found Fragile X as well. The attention deficit disorders, between 80 and 90% of males will have attention deficit, 35 to 45% or 47% of females. And some will also have seizures. There is no cure. There is no cure for Fragile X. No definitive single treatment. As you've heard me say before, we look at the behaviors that we have, we look at the deficits that we have, and that's what we write our goals for, to achieve those deficits, to help them progress in school. They have to have appropriate education. They need behavioral therapy. They may need occupational therapy, physical therapy, definitely speech and language therapy. There may be medication involved. If you can't attend, it's really challenging to learn. Part of their educational day may be pull out. They take the child from the class and go to the resource room, go down to the speech therapist. It could be that you, as the teacher, are going in and consulting. You may go into the classroom and work with the child in the classroom. There is no one right way. It is very specialized. There are some generalities with the pictures for sure, but it could be a combination of approaches that you are using. And I know a lot of parents don't like medication, and I'm not a medication pusher for ADHD, but again, you've got to look at what the child isn't accomplishing and what maybe could help. In the video, the mothers were smiling and laughing. Sometimes there was a time when mom began to cry, and I think the smiling and the laughing may have been some nerves. Mothers carry a lot of guilt. Mother even shared that. They got it from me. It was my fault. They got it from me. Now I want to share just for a few minutes some of the Fragile X experiences that I've had. I was trying to think of my very first one, and probably it was when I was in First Steps. And I went to a home. There were 4 children. I was brought into the home as the speech pathologist for the youngest child, and it was a little boy. And my first thought was, oh, wow, something's not quite right here. His facial features were not symmetrical. One eye was lower than the other. His face looked flat, almost like it was caved in a little bit up around the eyes. Well, that tells me there was some issues maybe with early development, because the development of the face comes like this. His tongue in and out, like that. And he wanted to lick everything. So I sat back and I observed him for a little while. The caseworker was with me. The case manager for his individual family service plan was with me. And we started talking, and I just sort of listened. She was asking questions, and I'm listening. And he had already had the diagnosis of Fragile X, because his no language, none. And he was probably 3, maybe 4, I think. He was small. And sometimes these children are smaller than their peers. And because things were very different in the way that he looked in some of the dysmorphic features, he had already been tested. Well, then the family decided they were going to test the other children, because the girls were having learning problems in school. Yes, sirree, Fragile X. There was another boy, and I don't remember if he was also diagnosed as Fragile X, but I believe both of the girls, they were older, middle school, freshmen, and the youngest little guy got the diagnosis. And the parents said, the girls have always struggled in school. You heard it on the video. And the girl who shared it herself, she knew she was different. She knew school was hard. And she began to get a little emotional about that too. Don't know what happened to that little booger. He aged out of First Steps, and I maybe wasn't even in with him for very long. He was, no, First Steps is 0 to 3, so he was probably real close to 3, and he was aging out. So I got in right at the tail end of that. The next one that I do remember is when I was working at Hillcroft, and it's a center for the developmentally disabled. And there was a family there, and I think they had 6 children, 5 or 6. And one of the boys lived in a group home. He was severely and profoundly involved. He had a seizure disorder. He wore a helmet. He was ambulatory. He could walk, no language, no speech. He was happy, so he'd smile and he might laugh. Sometimes there was a little self-abusive behavior. He had an older brother who years later worked at bussing tables at a local fast food restaurant. And I would go in and I would talk to him. He knew who I was, and because I'd worked at Hillcroft for a long time. Looking at him, you would never know. Even the facial features, long face, big ears, the high forehead, it wasn't very prominent. His features were more mild. But intellectually, when he started talking, and his conversation was very limited, he couldn't talk about too many things except his job, his mom. He wanted to drive a car. He wanted his driver's license. And he had wanted his driver's license for years and years and years and years. And he never did achieve that. And so it was very limiting. Talked about Special Olympics. But you couldn't get into much of an abstract conversation. But he worked. He was a good worker. He had an apartment, and he probably had a supported living trainer or a job coach, somebody who checked on him. So he was also diagnosed with Fragile X, but he wasn't as severe as the brother. Then there was a daughter, a daughter, and she had features that you might say, could be something wrong, maybe, maybe not. So she had the features more so of the longer face. Her ears, she could hide because of the hair. Forehead, even, I'm not really sure about that, but I do remember her face being somewhat oval in shape and elongated. And so her features, her disability was milder. Well, she had a boyfriend in the sheltered workshop, and they got together, and they had twins, and they had fraternal twins. So she had Fragile X, and the biological father did not. He had some intellectual deficits, but again, you wouldn't have known that maybe he was intellectually compromised. He was a higher functioning individual, and I suspect his early life was probably pretty sad. So they had fraternal twins, a boy and a girl. Okay, here we go. The boy was definitely diagnosed with Fragile X. He also had Tourette's. Now, I don't know if you know what Tourette's is, but he ticked. His head would turn, and he couldn't control that. It was a neurological tic. And he intellectually, he was compromised. I don't know much about him, but the sister appeared fine. Now, that doesn't mean that she didn't have some learning problems in school. She looked like she wasn't even a part of that family. So there again, 2 X chromosomes and an XY chromosome. So there were 3 siblings, at least 3. And I may not remember the other one. And then the daughter had 2 babies, and then it was carried down. So you have carriers of Fragile X. The other situation that I had, a woman came into the clinic and she was in for diagnostics. Lovely woman, very well put together. She was a secretary. She had a lot of responsibility. And she came in because she was having word-finding problems. She had bilateral hearing aids. She took great pride in her work. They liked her work. She had good friends. But she just felt like she was not cognitively connected, okay? And it had been getting worse. So I was supervising the diagnostic, and I was listening, and she was talking about her hearing loss. And then she began to give me share the symptoms of some cognitive neurological things with the student. So finally I went in and I said, well, can you tell me about any hospitalizations that you've had? And I wouldn't ask that question immediately. I would have built some rapport with her. And she told me a story about when she was little, 6, 7 years old, on the playground. And she was on the monkey bars and she was going across and she slipped and fell and hit her head, knocked out. And I'm going ding, 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 ding. I don't know what you're thinking, but I know what I was thinking. And I said, so what happened? She said, oh, I had a headache. I was dizzy. I had a seizure. I went home. TBI. I told my mom. She was one, I think, of 8 children. 5 of the 8 children, 5 of her siblings were diagnosed with Fragile X. She was not. And now this was a long time ago. And she said her mom was just so overwhelmed with these children with these learning deficits and these intellectual deficits. She never went to the doctor. She never had any treatment. And she was getting really emotional. And I said, did anybody ever talk to you about a traumatic brain injury? And then the tears rolled. And she said, I've looked it up. And I think I had a TBI. I said, yeah, it kind of sounds that way. Now, you're a productive person in society. You're doing well. You have friendships. You're married. You have children. But these deficits that happened many years ago were really becoming a problem. She did come in for some cognitive therapy, working on some skills to help with memory, word retrieval. I know what the word is. I know which word I want. I just can't find it. So she was not an individual with Fragile X, but certainly the family dynamics with Fragile X impacted what happened to her. And I am not sure how she's doing today. The last situation, I was called into a home. Oh, there's my girl. Come here. Come here. You want to come up and see the kids? Come here. Okay, there's the baby. Oh, I think she has her tongue out. Can you see her tongue? Look at that tongue out. The last one I want to tell you about is little boy went into the home, first steps, and all over the place. Oh my gosh, he just couldn't sit still, and his language was so delayed. Mom was a little different. Dad was very different. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, so please don't call and say I'm saying bad things about people, because I don't. But Dad had a major mental illness, and it developed and became much worse. He lost his job, drinking. She eventually had to divorce him. He became violent. It was very bad. The little boy, by the time I got in there, in the home, I think maybe he had been diagnosed with autism. But I don't know, there was something odd about that. I just couldn't say, oh my gosh, he's got to fall on the spectrum. I just feel it. We've got to get him diagnosed. He had early intervention, and early intervention is the key. Early intervention. And one of the other therapists who was going in the home, a developmental therapist, asked me, Patty, do you think he might get a diagnosis of Fragile X? Elongated face, the ears, the high forehead. And I don't know that he ever got tested, but certainly because they go together, and he may have. Along comes the little brother, and his features were not so prominent as an individual with Fragile X. His facial features were more within symmetrical range. It was more typical, definitely more typical. But he also was diagnosed with autism. So those have been at least those 4 families over the course of my career. 5 areas of language, right? 5 areas of language. You wrote about it in your papers. We've studied it. Language, speech and language problems are prominent. You could have a child in your classroom you don't even know. They don't know. The family doesn't know. So my advice to you is not be judgmental. See if you can figure out what might be going on, what's happening. I don't think children want to be bad. I think they want to learn. They love books. I think that there are many times things that we don't know about, and there are things that the family doesn't know about. Can you approach them? Not really, not really. But you can voice your concerns about their performance and that they're not learning to read. They are struggling with writing their name, those sorts of things. And say, you might go back to the doctor and you might ask if the doctor thinks a referral to Riley or Peyton Manning Children's Hospital might be warranted. Something like that. But also seek advice from the speech pathologist, the resource teacher, anybody else that you can seek advice from. Get the advice and get your ducks in a row, as I say. Get your ducks in a row. Now, the information that I put on Canvas for you, you don't have to know all of that. You don't have to know the genetics component. What I want you to know is some of the basic facts about Fragile X, because it is so common, much more than what we think. When we see a child who has a diagnosis of Down syndrome, we get it. But these kids get missed, and there's a reason for them to respond the way they do, to have the behaviors that they have. I think she's going to sleep. You gonna go night-night? You gonna go night-night? Are you about ready? My heart goes out to those families, and my heart goes out to those kids. Those kids know when they're not doing well. Oh, and one last thing. In the video, wasn't it really, really cool when Finn went into the regular classroom? I think it was Finn. He wasn't doing well in a special classroom, went into the regular classroom. And remember when the boys were running into his room and they sat on the bed? And they were so kind to him, and they included him. Kids are kind. And they were exactly what he needed. I hope you got some good advice from those parents, and I hope that in your career someday you'll say, I got that information out of Language Development 270. I hope you do. All right, I'm going to stop there with Fragile X. The next time we get together, it will be for review. You may hear the fire truck going by outside. The test will open on the 27th of April, Monday, at 8 o'clock in the morning. It will close on Wednesday, the 29th, at the end of the day, 10 o'clock or so. But we'll talk about that again later. Bye, guys.